Minister, thank you very much for your time today. We've just had the United States election, Donald Trump overwhelmingly voted in by Americans. Your Prime Minister Modi, what's his relationship like with Donald Trump?
Well, he has a very good, strong relationship. At a personal level, the leaders have a very strong friendship. You know, so we look forward to working with this administration.
It was also under the Trump administration that there was the revival of the Quad in 2017. How critical is this partnership with India, with Australia and the United States, given the rising threats we're facing in our region?
You are right that it was during the Trump administration that the Quad was revived. Not just revived, its levels were raised. Its agenda was expanded, and mind you, some of it happened in the midst of COVID. Today, I think, so, you know, Quad has grown, but I have every confidence that, you know, under the Trump administration, it will progress further.
Would India be prepared to support the United States militarily or otherwise in defence of Taiwan should there be a Chinese invasion?
I think you misunderstand what the Quad is about. The Quad is meant really as 4 countries coming together for a, you know, shared agenda, converging interests. So this kind of question, you know, the kind of scenario you're painting is probably appropriate for the kind of treaty ally that Australia is. So I don't know, maybe in the case of Japan, but I don't think it really, the question and the kind of scenario fits in with what we really discuss and envisage on the Quad.
It was more of a question separate from the Quad, you know. Given China has been warning that it does have plans to reunify with Taiwan, has India given any consideration to what role it would be prepared to play if that eventuates?
India has its interests, India has its security concerns. Please bear in mind we are the only Quad country which also has a land border with China. So, you know, I don't think, you know, honestly this question is warranted given our history and where we're coming from.
India is, of course, also part of the BRICS partnership, a member of both. Do you recognise the angst that India's relationship with Russia at times causes Australia?
I don't think we have given cause for any angst for this reason. Look, in this day and age, countries don't have exclusive relationship. I mean, if I were to use that logic, I would say, well, so many countries have relationship with Pakistan. I mean, look at the angst that should cause me. Yeah, and let me tell you 2 things here. You know, what India has done and is doing with Russia is actually, in my view, helpful to the international community as a whole. If we had not made the moves we had, let me tell you, the energy markets would have taken a completely different turn and actually would have precipitated a global energy crisis. It would have caused inflation across the world as a consequence. Equally, it is the fact that we have today a good relationship with Russia allows us to be, in a way, a country in between which has the ability to both talk to Russia and to Ukraine and to try to find some intersection in those conversations. And I think the world, including Australia, needs such a country which will help to bring back this conflict back to the conference table.
You're right, India has been a very good friend of Ukraine. So what path do you see then as a middle country in stopping Russia's invasion of Ukraine?
The way out is to find an ending to this conflict.
A negotiated ending?
Conflicts rarely end on the battlefield. Mostly they end in a negotiation. So you can see that this one, at some point, is going to head for a negotiation.
Do you think Trump will have a big role to play in that?
Well, I think the United States is, you know, the world's preeminent power in a way. And the United States will naturally, and it's been very closely involved from the very start. So obviously the US would have its influence and its views on it. But your earlier question, I do think that it's important for countries who have the access, the comfort, the credibility to engage both Moscow and Kiev, to do that with a view of bringing this conflict to an early end, because we know at some stage it will come to the negotiating table. So if we can hasten that, if we can facilitate that, I would argue that it's in everybody's interest.
It's a very pragmatic view of the world, because in Australia, in the United States, in the United Kingdom, there's been a lot of concern over the emerging alliance and the increasing cooperation between China and Russia, North Korea and Iran. You know, the supply of weaponry, for example. Do you think that this emerging axis of evil, as it's called, Russia, China, Iran and North Korea, do you believe this is a growing threat to the world? And do you think Iran's increasing nuclear capabilities will need to be dealt with?
You know, this picture that you've painted, I assume that it's your sense that it's grown closer since 2022, after the Ukraine conflict started, right?
Yes.
That's actually the case why it's in everybody's interest that the sooner the conflict ends, the better. Because the longer the conflict drags out, you know, all sorts of things are going to happen. Not all these things could necessarily be to Australia's advantage or to that of Western countries. So, the more you are concerned about, some of these developments, I think the stronger a case you're making for why we should be more active in the pursuit of a negotiated solution. That's the best contribution I can make.
Are you concerned about their increasing cooperation, though?
I'm concerned about the fact that more people are getting killed, more, countries in some way or the other are getting involved, and we think that's not good.
India has banned TikTok.
Yes, we blocked it.
Exactly. India has shown that you can be technologically advanced and survive at the same time without a reliance on Chinese technology such as TikTok. Is this a lesson that India can show for the world?
Well, look, it's a decision that every country has to make, keeping in mind their sensitivities. And there was a particular context and a particular sensitivity for this decision, because we do, first of all, a medium like this, a lot of things are put out there, many of which accidentally, inadvertently have a certain security sensitivity to it. The second, which is a larger question, is a data-related question. Okay, I assume that in Australia, like in India, like in many other parts of the world, people are very concerned about the protection of the personal data. And we go to great trouble, all of us, to enact legislation, regulations, which protect us. Now, I put it to you that should you not be concerned if your data leaves your national jurisdiction and then doesn't get treated with the same levels of protection? After all, your data is your data, whether it's in the country or out of the country.
This is what's happening with TikTok. The Chinese regime is collecting data.
Look, I make you a general proposition. If I am sensitive about my personal data, my sensitivity cannot and should not be limited to some games and apps and some jurisdictions. Data privacy is data privacy wherever it goes. So I think we are very entitled to take whatever steps we feel is necessary for the data privacy and data protection of individual citizens.
Do you think Australia should follow suit and ban TikTok?
Look, I don't give advice, certainly not public advice to other countries. I think it's for every government to take a call about the welfare of its citizens on whichever issue. I mean, it doesn't have to be this issue.
Yeah. How concerned are you about China's economic coercion, intellectual property theft, cyber attacks, intimidation and aggression in the region?
Let me offer two comments here. One, we all ultimately inhabit a region. It's important we get along. I think everybody, and I'm not picking on any particular country here, I think everybody should observe the laws, the rules, the norms, because that's how countries get along with each other. You know, so if there is, let us say, a law of the seas, you know, if we all joined up to a regime of how to regulate the seas, then we must accept that regime. Now, sometimes it can go against your interests. It can happen. But you have to accept that too. I mean, we've had, for example, important maritime disputes with some of our neighbors, with Bangladesh, for example. And not everything went our way, but yet we accepted it. So it could be, you know, the rules and norms. It could be also a sense today in a globalized world that if I'm dependent on you, if you have a big market share in my country, it's important that economics and trade remain what they are. If they are leveraged, you know, if somewhere they become pressure points, you can understand there'll be a natural anxiety. So I think today, you know, there's a simple proposition, as much for nations as for individuals. The world will treat you depending on how you behave. You behave well, you know, everybody wants to do more with you. If you are seen anywhere as a risky proposition, if people get anxious, people start to hedge. Countries start to hedge.
Australia, you know, was under our former Prime Minister Scott Morrison. He simply called for an inquiry into the origins of COVID-19, a perfectly reasonable thing to suggest given there was a global pandemic that was killing millions of people. And yet, in response, in retaliation, China put these extreme trade tariffs on Australia. I mean, that's not being a responsible citizen in our global community, is it?
Well, you know, again, I reiterate my point to you. In a globalized world, I mean, what do we all want, okay? We would like to give our citizens the best quality of life at the most reasonable prices, which is why we do a lot of international trade, we allow investments, we use other people's technology, other people's products, services. But the moment you start worrying that can this become a point of pressure? Can this be taken out of that economic domain and taken into some other domain? I think then you start to question the whole logic of this kind of supply chain and globalization. And what we have seen in the last few years is actually that worry. I mean, we came back, I mean, let me go back to the starting point of this interview when you spoke about the American election. I mean, today if, you know, President Donald Trump feels that, look, the US should have more national capacities, you know, why is US needs to be careful or prudent about, you know, what it is getting from outside. There are experiences which have shaped it, you know. These experiences can be employment experiences where people feel unfair competition has eaten up their jobs. Or it could be national security complications. You don't want exposure in areas like, say, telecom, which is a worry. Or it could be a worry that, you know, some other country would use a big market share or a high level of dependence to do something.
You've brought up the United States. Trump has said he will impose trade tariffs on imported goods. Is this a worry?
We don't, in my business, do hypothetical stuff. I mean, we'll see what happens.
Not so much a hypothetical, though. He said he will.
Let's see what happens.
Back to what you were saying, I mean, in light of COVID-19, this is a big lesson in diversifying, isn't it?
I think the COVID-19 was the most graphic illustration. It's not the only one, but absolutely. I mean, and again, I'm not just stating Indian point of view, or you refer to what is thinking in Australia. I've traveled a fair amount to Africa, and I can't tell you the anger in Africa about how they were treated during COVID. That, the fact that they were the last, in a way, in the queue to get vaccines, that there were travel issues which came about, and their dependence was very starkly, in a way, exposed. Yeah. So today, across the world, I think countries and regions are trying to build local capacities. They are looking, we would talk in terms of just in time. We would talk in terms of lowest cost. I think people are today understanding that those are not the only factors. Yeah. We speak about food security. You'd rather pay more and be assured of food. Health security. You'd rather produce at home or, from a trusted partner. And, even if it means paying more, then rely on the cheapest partner who may let you down.
Who's unreliable.
Who's unreliable.
Yeah.
So I would actually put it to you, don't just think about it as an outcome of an American political happening. I put it to you that the world is actually headed for a reworking of supply chains, for a much greater emphasis on trusted partners, for much greater sensitivity on anything digital, for a much stronger focus on all the implications of anything technology driven. So it's going to be a very, very different set of relationships that all of us are sliding into, and which is why for me the relationship with Australia has so much value, because today we have that trust, we have that sensitivity, we are developing that experience of working together. So there are a lot of things, I'd be comfortable getting out of Australia or doing with Australia, which I may not be with some other countries.
This has been a key focus of your trips to Australia. I mean, you've been here so much in the past few years, and just this week, of course, you met with the Prime Minister, Anthony Albanese, and key politicians as well. Why have you dedicated your time to Australia like this?
Well, I think Australia deserves it. Look, I'm being serious. My Prime Minister, very, very early on in his tenure, I'm talking 2014, actually one of the first conversations I had with him when he became Prime Minister, he actually asked me, saying, explain to me why our relationship with Australia is still at this level. Why hasn't it grown more? Because we have no problems. We have so much going for us. Why haven't we made that effort? And he answered the question himself by making that effort. So, for 20-something years, we didn't have leadership level visits. Yes, occasionally ministers went up and down, but there was no drive in the relationship. But you see, from 2014, it's changed. And that year we had 2 visits. Tony Abbott went to India, and Prime Minister Modi came to Australia. I think after that, every Prime Minister of Australia has been to India.
Yeah. And there have been a few in those years?
Yes, a few, yes, indeed. When I felt this is such a under-realized, undervalued relationship that if you commit time and effort to it, it will surely reward you. And that's really what we have seen in this last decade. And I'd be fair, I'd also say my Australian counterparts have also had a similar approach. So whether it's the current foreign minister or the previous one, or some of the other ministers, the Deputy Prime Minister, Defence Minister Richard Marles, Penny, as I said, or Prime Minister Albanese himself. Every one of them has put in the effort on their side. Their predecessors did it. And if we have reached where we have reached today, it's 10 years of hard work. But that 10 years of hard work should tell us that so much more is possible.
Your Prime Minister Modi, he's one of the few, arguably, incredibly strong world leaders at this point in time. Would you agree with that? He stands out among the pack. Well,
I may not be entirely objective.
I want to ask you about the Middle East, because we've covered Russia and Ukraine, and the Middle East obviously is another key point of war and conflict at the moment. Would India be supporting if the United States was to once again try and have Israel and Saudi Arabia do a normalisation deal as they were close to achieving prior to October 7? Is that relationship something that India would support as a pathway to peace?
The Middle East, we call it West Asia, it matters hugely to us. It matters to us because we have about 9 million Indians who live there. It's the source of a very large proportion of our energy. Some of our top 20 trade partners, I'd say probably about 1/3 of them would be in that region. It sits astride our key connectivity corridors. So by every logic, it's hugely important for us. So we're obviously very concerned at what's been happening there. Our effort has been to, in the short term, contain the conflict, mitigate it, cool it down to the extent possible. Right now, a lot of that is what's happening between Israel and Iran, where we have also tried to help in some ways. So we talk to both sides, and anything thereafter which happens or which is required, we try to do. In terms of the somewhat longer term issues, you spoke about the normalization of Israel's relationship with, you mentioned Saudi Arabia, but there could be others as well. I want to say that we were one of the countries very strongly supportive of the Abraham Accords. So you can see, what our thinking is. We also are very much a part, in fact, one of the drivers of this interesting connectivity initiative called IMEC, India, Middle East, Europe Economic Corridor, which has currently kind of not moved because of the conflict which is underway, but which we know will surely unfold. So there's a lot. The stakes are big, the challenges are big, but I think our thinking is, look, do what you can to stabilize it short term, to address some of the sharp edges, to encourage countries to forge relationships, then to get them to move beyond that to actually work together. So that would be broadly our approach.
Given India supported the Abraham Accords, similar deals with other Arab nations, surely that is the best pathway to peace in the region, isn't it?
I think there are many aspects to it, but overall, yes, I mean, in a sense, the more understandings there are, the more there is an acceptance of each other.
Yeah.
Because unless you begin somewhere, we are actually looking at a vision of countries working together. The starting point of countries working together is some willingness to accept realities and to start dealing with each other. So it's not easy, but it's important, and certainly our interests are very much working with everybody, including the United States, in ensuring that the countries in the Middle East are all able to deal with each other and work with each other.
Can the world afford to continue to sit back and watch as nuclear abilities are developed by Tehran?
We have a view on nuclear non-proliferation. As you know, again, I spoke earlier about laws and norms and rules. If countries join regimes, sign treaties, the international order requires that they keep their word.
And if they don't?
Then the international order obviously, sort of reacts to it. So for us, we are very clear. We think that nuclear non-proliferation is destabilizing. We believe that countries which signed the NPT must abide by their commitment. It's a clear-cut proposition for us.
And if they don't, would India support Israel or the United States targeting the nuclear sites militarily?
No. I think you're painting. I mean, I understand.
I think that is a realistic possibility,
where you're coming from, but it's not a discussion. Certainly, look, we don't. We again, I put it to you. The purpose of our diplomacy is actually to do diplomacy, not to see recourse to force as a natural or early or a preferred option. I think at the end of the day, this is not a homily I'm giving you. I'm giving you good common sense. A lot of problems in the world are resolved by countries and people sitting down. The moment you go down the path of force and violence, it's so much easier started than ended.
That's easy when it's a like-minded nation, but if you're dealing with a dictator or an evil regime like Iran, makes it very difficult.
You have your point of view, I hear you. I have my point of view, and you heard me.
I would ask you about cricket, but I'm not a cricket expert over here.
It's obviously a sport which most Indians are deeply devoted to. So I assure you it's going to be a very interesting cricketing season.
I'm sure it will be indeed. Thank you very much for your time. Really appreciate it. Thank you.